Welcome to the Irish NFL Show in association with our partner QuinnBet as we continue our annual off-season divisional and team reviews, and we turn to the NFC South. Myself, Shane, Kieran and Noel all back to discuss this one, and we're going to kick off with the defending champions, Noel, who are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, winners of that intriguing wildcard game back in January, where they hammered the Eagles before then losing that big game to the Lions on the road, which I guess was huge for both clubs. Meant the Bucs went home, meant the Lions went on and got that first playoff win under their belt, and what that did for Detroit. We can get to that when we come to the NFC North in due course. Right now, though, it's all about the Bucs. The key question here for me, and I don't know if you agree or not, is what version of Baker do we get in season 2? Because the history with Baker has been that you can get good Baker, but it's not always followed up by good Baker in season 2. Are we being unfair there, or has he turned the corner?
No, I think it's a valid question. Look, he's obviously had ups and downs, as we talk about in the league there. Last season was a really good season for him. He earned that new contract he got. He's got some good players around him, obviously. But still, you know, like anyone, or like any team, it's important that your quarterback is able to lead you to it. And it's to be seen now if Baker Mayfield can keep that going forward. I mean, as we talk about, Mike Evans re-signed, so he's there. But yeah, they've a new offensive coordinator as well. That's a big thing in terms of you're losing Dave Canales to a rival. So does that play a part at all for Baker? We'll kind of find out if he was a big part of that Baker Mayfield revival. But again, I think it's fair to question a player who's had such kind of up and down, if he can continue that going forward. Obviously, defenses will look at what he did last year, maybe try to work around that. So it'll be interesting to see, but the Bucs will need him to keep that performance up if they want to kind of challenge or keep up with the Falcons, who look like they could be an exciting team on offense anyway.
Because to your point, no, playing wise, it's pretty much continuity from the offensive perspective, and you know he'll be relieved, Baker, to see Mike Evans, for instance, retained. That's obviously a big one for them. But the OC question, I think, is a legitimate one. Like we saw what happened to the Eagles last year without their OC. It can derail your entire offense if you lose the guy that everything revolved around, and it's always difficult to see until they actually leave. Were they actually the man, or were they relying on the supporting staff around them, and can somebody else step up and step into that place? Couple of key exits though as well, Kieran. Like they lose Shaq Barrett, obviously that's potentially a big loss. They strike me as yet one more of those teams who you hope for their sake have had a good draft class this year, because they are aging out on the talent side, and you're looking at guys to step up and keep the momentum going, because if you stay still, you're going backwards.
Yeah, and luckily for the Bucs, you know, they had a fairly decent draft. You know, Graham Barton, Bucky Irving, good pickups for them. The things that are going around in my head with the Buccaneers are which team will show up this year. You know, they're in an NFC South, which it's close to a race to the bottom kind of division. Who's gonna last at the end? The Bucs went 5-1 to finish the season and edged out the Saints for a playoff spot. Did they fire all the bullets last season? I mean, we know they caught lightning in a bottle with that playoff win over Philadelphia. Tampa was that stadium, that atmosphere at home was incredible. And then they ran out of gas when they came to playing Detroit. Which, like we said earlier, which version of Baker will show up? I mean, this is a guy that was 12 months ago was competing with Kyle Trask for a starting position, and now all of a sudden he's got his 3-year, $100 million deal. So he's taken care of. Where's the, I've heard and I've seen, the comments that Baker feels at home at Tampa, and that's where he wants to retire, and that's great. But which version of Tampa will show up? Mike Evans has been paid. They re-signed Antoine Winfield. They got Chase McLaughlin. All these guys got paid. Which version is going to show up? Are we going to get the team that scrambled and rallied at the end of the season, or are they going to take a backseat to a team that may kind of overtake them? And we'll talk about the Falcons a little bit later on. But it's a strong draft. Free agency, they were very active, re-signing a lot of players. Randy Gregory, Jordan Whitehead from the Jets. A lot of things were addressed for the Buccaneers. But I'm really intrigued to see which version shows up this year.
Because they've been solid in the trenches as well, Kieran, which is probably one of the foundations of their success. You know, people thought there'd be a cliff edge for this team, and there hasn't been, to be fair to them. And yeah, okay, part of that is that you can only beat what's around you. And as you rightly call out, this is not one of the NFL's more tooth and nail divisions, or it's tooth and nail precisely because there's no big beast in it. It's so relatively vanilla in terms of the overall talent. But they've held their own, to be fair to them, and they haven't gone into that dark place or required much of a rebuild. I'm not so sure they would necessarily have expected to go as well as they did last year.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. You know, they balled out in December, and you know, I'll use the phrase again, they hit light in the bottle towards the end of the season. They got hot when they need to get hot. They re-signed the players they need to, you know, and they strengthened the positions that they needed to. Very active in free agency, so they're going to be feeling real good about where they are. So I'm just, you know, like I said, will the Baker effect is going to be intriguing. You know, he's now been paid. Let's see how he acts in year two. He's the kind of player that urges or he yearns to belong somewhere. He's bounced around the league a little bit now that he's been paid and he's felt the love from Tampa. Let's see how that translates into 24.
Shane, I'm gonna drop a name here disgustingly, and you know, you're gonna have to forgive me on this one. But I remember having a conversation with Roy Keane once, and one of the things he said was, "There's a place for everyone, and you can know instantly where you're in the right place and in the right club." And he was, you know, talking about different clubs where he'd played and managed, and particularly drawing the contrast between Ipswich and Sunderland at the time, saying Sunderland felt like home. He said, "I knew when I was in Ipswich, I'm not so sure this is going to work out so well." Baker, you know, I would argue maybe is experiencing the opposite effect here, because he's washed up in Tampa and it seems like he's feeling it. And if this is the place, then the Bucs could be a very intriguing watch this year.
When you were talking to Roy Keane, did you by any chance did you tell him that the place he was meant to be was Saipan in 2002 and playing in that World Cup rather than turning his back on his country? But anyway, that's a conversation.
That's the first thing I told him, Shane. Obviously, I launched straight in there and felt fully justified in lecturing about that. Yeah. And when I finished picking up my teeth, then we started talking about Ipswich and Sunderland.
You're taking the head off you. Well, look, anyway, sorry, back on to Baker Mayfield. Look, it really is difficult to gauge what Baker Mayfield is. There are a couple of reasons why I'm not that confident in not necessarily him and his ability and the fact that he feels at home there. But I mean, some form of honeymoon period has to end. He's had his good season. He's had his landmark playoff win against the Eagles, who in fairness didn't really come in the best type of form into that playoff game. Not to take anything from the Buccaneers, and I don't mean to do that. He had a great end of the season last year. He's gotten his $100+ million contract. Okay, now it's time to get some work done. There were two big surprise packages in the NFL last year, both in the Southern divisions, the Buccaneers and the Texans. The difference between the Buccaneers and the Texans, the fact the Texans, you know full well what you can expect, and they have pressure on them because there is a real high expectation of what they can do and what they have the potential to do going forward. With Baker Mayfield, I just don't think they have the ability to really deliver on that. They had a great end of the season last year. Like Noel alluded to earlier, they have changes in their offensive coaching. Not quite sure what they're really adding into their offensive talent in terms of the guys that are protecting the quarterback, in terms of the guys they are thrown to. And at some point, when a new quarterback comes into a system like this, the more tape there is, the more he starts getting into his comfort zone, that's when he starts getting repetitive. Because obviously last year, that was his prove-it year. How many times have we seen in the NFL where a quarterback has a prove-it year, has a year where he tries to get himself a big contract or feel at home in a new franchise, comes in the next season and doesn't quite perform? A bit of complacency comes in to 90% of these people. It is only really the very, very top quarterbacks where complacency never really hits them, like we see, for example, with Patrick Mahomes. So at some point in this season, Baker's going to be unlocked. I'm not saying it's going to happen in the start of the season. I don't think the Buccaneers' schedule is particularly difficult, and I'm not just saying that because they are in the NFC South. I mean, their first few games, obviously, they have to travel to Detroit. They have to play at home against the Eagles. Obviously, there's probably a nice mental bounce to get from that. But they don't really have any difficult road games until they have to go to Arrowhead Stadium in the 5th of November. So they have a bit of time to work things around. But by the time we get into playing those Thanksgiving games, somebody's going to unlock that offense. Someone's going to find a way to shut Baker down. And I just don't think that what happened at the end of last season, I think, will carry into the start of this season. But the further we get on, I think the more weaknesses will be exposed, and the more the teams will be able to really get at them in terms of how other defenses really poke at the Tampa Bay offense. In terms of the Tampa Bay defense, I'm really not sure what to expect from them either. That is a bigger question for me. They don't really have too many tough challenges to test themselves against in the first half of the season. Obviously, every NFL game is difficult, but you know, they were 9-8 last season, or sorry, I think it was a little bit better than that. Yeah, that's the region they're in. All it takes is for a bad patch in November for them to really become derailed. So I'm not riding now. Last year I wasn't riding high on Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers, and I was proved wrong. But this year I think there are reasons to believe that somehow, somewhere, I'm fitting in. I love this place is going to turn into, oh Jesus, this is harder than I thought.
All right, well, we shall see how much gunpowder is left in the cannon in Raymond James Field and whether they'll be firing all season long, as they were for most of last season, as we pointed out. But that is your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All right, we continue.